You thought you were free, but slowly, without agreement, without warning, you began following rules that were never spoken, rules that no one explained. And yet, you followed them anyway, not out of choice, but out of fear. Fear of losing the connection, fear of pushing them away. This is the avoidance quiet power. They don't demand, they don't command, they don't argue. They just create an atmosphere, an invisible field around them, where you learn what is safe to say, what is dangerous to reveal, what will keep them close, what will make them run. This is how they control closeness, without ever asking for control. The invisible rulebook. Every avoidant lives by a rulebook, not written down, not spoken out loud, but carved into them, carved by childhood, carved by silence, carved by rejection. They were taught early. Too much closeness is unsafe. Too much need is a burden. Too much love feels like a trap. And so the rules were born. Rules like, don't ask for too much. Don't show all your feelings. Don't expect me to carry you. Don't believe I'll need you back. These rules are unspoken, but you feel them instantly. When you text too much, they pull back. When you share too deeply, they go cold. When you hope for closeness, they retreat. You sense it. You adjust. You obey, not because you want to, but because it's the only way to keep them near. The first silent rule is born. Don't ask for more. Then another follows. Don't confront me when I withdraw. If you do, they shut down harder. They vanish deeper. They punish with silence. So you stop. You swallow pain. You process alone. You pretend you're fine. Another rule appears. Don't be too available. Because to them, your warmth feels like pressure. Your giving feels like chains. Your love feels like suffocation. So you learn restraint. You mirror their silence. You hold back your words. You shrink your love. Until one day, you realize you're not free. You're not loving naturally. You're following, adjusting, obeying, not to grow the relationship, but to prevent it from breaking. That's the trap. The rules were never designed to bring you closer. They were designed to keep you out. Distance, walls, barriers, not shouted, not demanded, but enforced in silence. And without knowing, you've been living by them. Because the price of breaking them felt too high. The price was losing them. So you followed, hoping obedience would earn intimacy. But the truth is clear. The rulebook is not a path to closeness. It is a defense against it. How these rules quietly shape the relationship. At first, you don't notice it. It feels small, harmless, temporary. Just one compromise, just one adjustment. You tell yourself, it's not a big deal. This is just how they are. I can live with it. But silence has power, and avoidance has gravity. It pulls you into its orbit without you realizing. Soon, the rules are everywhere. Not written, not spoken, not chosen, but felt. In your body, in your heart. You don't chase when they pull back. You don't cry when you're hurting. You don't say the truth when you're scared. Because you've learned. Closeness costs. Neediness pushes them away. Honesty creates distance. So you begin to shape yourself around their silence. You become smaller, quieter, lighter, like someone tiptoeing through a sacred space, afraid to disturb the air. You call it respecting their boundaries. But it's not respect. It's fear. Fear of waking their walls. Fear of losing their presence. And in that fear, you trade authenticity for survival. You wanted to love freely. But now your love is edited, filtered, measured. Every word you send, you rehearse twice. Every text, you time carefully. Every confession, you dilute. So it doesn't feel too much. This is how the rules spread. They creep into your nervous system. They rewire your instincts. They change your rhythm of love until you no longer know, am I loving them? Or am I just avoiding punishment? The rules are subtle. They don't tell you, don't laugh too loudly. But when your joy feels excessive, you sense their discomfort and you dim yourself. They don't tell you, don't call me when I'm away. But when you reach out and hear the sigh or feel the coolness, you back off. You don't even argue. You just learn. The body keeps the lesson. Slowly, their rule book becomes your own. Not because you agree, not because you want to, but because it's safer, because it feels like the only way to keep them near. And here's the paradox. You're following rules they never even admitted exist. They don't sit you down and say, here are the conditions to love me. They don't explain. They don't confess. They just react. And in their reactions, you find the rules. You map them like landmines. And you memorize where not to step. At first, you think you're being patient. You think, if I just follow long enough, they'll relax. If I just respect their needs, they'll eventually meet mine. But that's not how avoidance works. Because every rule you obey confirms their belief. Closeness is dangerous. Love is pressure. Intimacy must be managed. So your compromise becomes their comfort zone, and the cycle deepens. This is why relationships with avoidance so often feel lopsided. One person shrinking, one person protecting, one bending, one retreating, and both calling it love. But love without freedom isn't love. It's survival. And survival has no joy. It has no safety. It has no trust. It's just two people acting out an old script, one hiding from closeness, the other hiding their needs. But here's the hardest truth. By following these rules, you don't just lose them, you lose yourself. Because your laughter is smaller, your voice is quieter, your needs are buried. You don't just adapt to them, you disappear for them, piece by piece, day by day, rule by rule, until the person you were at the start, open, loving, fearless, is gone, replaced by someone careful, calculated, cautious, a version of you who no longer loves freely, but survives conditionally. And the avoidant? They feel safer, but not closer. They don't realize your shrinking isn't peace. It's silence. It's suppression. It's sacrifice. And because you've become so good at following the rules, they never have to face the cost of their distance. They never have to see the loneliness they create. They never have to confront the intimacy they fear, because you carry the weight of it alone. This is how the rules shape the relationship, not by making it stable, not by making it healthy, but by making it predictable. Predictable distance, predictable silence, predictable retreat. And you live in reaction, not freedom, not honesty, not love, just reaction, day after day. And the saddest part? You start to believe this is normal, that this is just how love is, that this is all you deserve. But it's not. It's just the silent rules. Rules you never agreed to. Rules you never wanted. Rules you never spoke. But rules you obeyed. Because loving them felt like breaking them wasn't an option. And yet, deep down, a question begins to rise. What would happen if I stopped obeying? What would happen if I chose freedom over fear? What would happen if I broke their rules and made my own? That question is the beginning of power, because once you see the rules, you can unlearn them. And once you unlearn them, you can begin to love without fear again. Why you follow them without realizing you didn't mean to. You didn't wake up one day and say, I'll give up my needs. I'll silence my voice. I'll live by someone else's rules. No, it happened slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. And by the time you noticed, You were already living in it, already bending, already adjusting, already obeying. So why do you follow? Why does someone strong, loving, independent end up living inside someone else's unspoken conditions? The answer isn't weakness. It's love, and it's fear, both woven tightly together. When you love, you want to protect the connection. You want to nurture it, preserve it, keep it alive. And when that love feels fragile, when you sense that if you push too hard, you might lose them, you start negotiating with yourself. Maybe I don't need to bring this up. Maybe I can let it go. Maybe it's not worth the fight. And little by little, you convince yourself that silence is safer than honesty, that patience is safer than truth, that waiting is safer than asking. But underneath, it's not really patience. It's not really respect. It's fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of loss. Because somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, if I show too much, they'll leave. If I ask for too much, they'll disappear. If I push too hard, they'll shut me out. So why do you follow? Why does someone strong, loving, independent end up living inside someone else's unspoken conditions? The answer isn't weakness. It's love, and it's fear, both woven tightly together. When you love, you want to protect the connection. You want to nurture it, preserve it, keep it alive. And when that love feels fragile, when you sense that if you push too hard, you might lose them, you start negotiating with yourself. Maybe I don't need to bring this up. Maybe I can let it go. Maybe it's not worth the fight. And little by little, you convince yourself that silence is safer than honesty, that patience is safer than truth, that waiting is safer than asking. But underneath, it's not really patience. It's not really respect. It's fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of loss. Because somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, if I show too much, they'll leave. If I ask for too much, they'll disappear. If I push too hard, they'll shut me out. So you stop pushing, you stop asking, you stop showing, and instead, you start following. It feels almost noble. You tell yourself, I'm being understanding. I'm giving them space. I'm not pressuring them. And yes, there's truth in that. But the deeper truth, you're afraid. Afraid of rocking the boat. Afraid of waking the dragon. Afraid of triggering their retreat. So you don't challenge. You don't question. You don't resist. You just follow. But it's not only fear. It's also conditioning. Because long before this relationship, your nervous system learned something. It learned that love is fragile. That connection is conditional. That closeness can vanish if you misstep. Maybe you had parents who were unpredictable. One moment warm, the next moment distant. Maybe you grew up walking on eggshells, careful not to upset, careful not to need too much, careful not to be too much. So when you meet someone avoidant, your body already knows the dance, already knows the script, already knows how to shrink, how to adjust, how to obey, without even thinking. This is why you follow, without realizing. Because the avoidance silence doesn't just frustrate you, it familiarizes you. It reminds your nervous system of a story it's lived before, a story where your needs felt heavy, where love had conditions, where you had to earn closeness by being small. So instead of resisting, you comply, not because you choose it, but because it feels like the only way to keep love. Think about it. When they pull away, what do you feel? Panic, not anger, not clarity, panic. And in that panic, your brain scrambles. What did I do wrong? What should I change? How do I fix this? Notice, your instinct is not to stand firm. It's not to set boundaries. It's not to demand respect. Your instinct is to adapt, to bend, to soften, to obey. Because your nervous system believes, if I change me, I can keep them. That belief is powerful, and it keeps you trapped in the avoidance silent rules. Because every time you obey, you confirm to yourself, yes, this is how I keep love. And every time you confirm it, the rule digs deeper until it feels less like a choice and more like a law, unbreakable, absolute, sacred. But let's tell the truth. These rules are not sacred. They are not laws. They are survival strategies. Strategies your nervous system adopted to protect connection. Strategies their nervous system enforces to protect distance. And together, those strategies create a fragile dance. One hides, one chases, one retreats, one obeys, and both call it love. But it's not love, it's survival. And survival feels addictive, because in survival, every tiny moment of closeness feels like oxygen. They open up for one night, and you feel high. They hold your hand in public, and you feel seen. They text you first, and you feel alive again. The scraps of intimacy feel enormous, because you've starved yourself to keep their distance satisfied. And when you're starving, a crumb feels like a feast. This is why you stay. This is why you follow. Because even crumbs feel like proof of love. But here's the tragedy. The more you follow, the more invisible you become. And the more invisible you become, the more alone you feel. Until you're in a relationship that looks like closeness, but feels like emptiness. Smiles on the outside, hunger on the inside, touch on the surface, distance underneath. A love story that drains instead of fills. And yet, you stay because leaving feels impossible. Because part of you believes, if I just keep following, they'll eventually see me. They'll eventually meet me. They'll eventually choose me. But here's the secret. They can't. Not as long as the rules remain. Because the rules were built to protect them from love, not to grow it, not to share it, not to deepen it, to protect them. And as long as you obey, you protect them too, not from danger, but from transformation. This is why you follow, without realizing. Because love makes you hopeful, fear makes you cautious, conditioning makes you compliant. And together, those three forces convince you that silence is safer than truth, that distance is safer than closeness, that survival is safer than freedom. But the deeper truth is this: obeying the rules doesn't save love. It only prolongs the absence of it. And one day, that quiet question rises again. What if I stopped following? What if I broke the rules? What if I chose me instead of their silence? That question feels terrifying, but it's also the first breath of freedom. Because the moment you ask it, you remember, love is not meant to suffocate you. It is meant to hold you, to see you, to welcome you. Not the smaller you, not the careful you, not the edited you, but the whole you. And the day you remember that, the rules lose their power. Not all at once, not without fear, but slowly, steadily, surely, you begin to unlearn them. And in that unlearning, you begin to see love without freedom isn't love at all. It's fear. And you were never meant to live by fear. You were meant to live by love. The hidden cost of obeying these rules. You think you're keeping the peace. You think you're protecting the bond. You think that by bending, adapting, and silencing parts of yourself, you're saving the relationship. But every time you obey one of their silent rules, a piece of you is lost. Not in one big dramatic collapse, but in slow, invisible fragments, like sand slipping through your fingers. You don't notice it at first, but one day you look down, and the weight you used to carry is gone. The first cost is self-betrayal. When you follow their unspoken rule, don't text too much. Don't ask for reassurance. Don't talk about the future. You are teaching yourself that your own needs are dangerous. You begin to believe that love means silence. That connection means absence. That safety means walking on eggshells. And here's the truth. When love requires self-erasure, it is not love. The second cost is resentment. Because while you're obeying their rules, they are not obeying yours. They are not adjusting to your hidden limits. They are not reducing their distance for your comfort. They are not choosing vulnerability for your healing. The sacrifice is not equal. And in that imbalance, your heart begins to ache with quiet rage. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that festers. The kind that whispers, "Why am I always the one giving up pieces of myself just to be loved?" The third cost is isolation. You can be in the same room with them and still feel utterly alone. Because the real you, the you who feels deeply, the you who longs for closeness, the you who wants to be chosen boldly, is not allowed to exist. They haven't just distanced themselves from you. They've trained you to distance yourself from your own truth. So you sit beside them and smile and pretend it's enough. But in the quiet of the night, you wonder if anyone will ever really see you. The fourth cost is identity erosion. Because when you keep obeying rules that don't belong to you, you begin to forget who you are. You used to be expressive. You used to laugh loudly. You used to dream big. But now you shrink. You edit yourself before every word. You live inside the cage of acceptable that someone else built. And after a while, you can't tell the difference between your authentic self and the muted version you've become. That's the tragedy of these silent rules. They don't just limit the relationship. They rewire the way you see yourself. The fifth cost is time. Because every year you spend obeying their silent rules is a year you don't spend living freely. A year where you could have been loved openly. A year where your needs could have been met without guilt. A year where intimacy could have been a joy, not a battlefield. Time is the one thing you never get back. And avoidance, with their endless delays, their half-promises, their maybe someday, don't just steal your closeness. They steal your years. The sixth cost is emotional numbness. At first, you feel the ache. You notice the distance. You crave what's missing. But as time goes on, you start to shut down. You convince yourself, maybe I don't need that much love. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe silence is safer than truth. This is how people who crave intimacy become avoidant themselves. Not because it's who they are, but because they've learned that reaching hurts and numbing feels easier. But the problem is this. When you numb pain, you also numb joy. When you silence longing, you also silence love. And so life becomes flat, a gray blur of half feelings, because you obeyed rules that killed your fire. The seventh cost is lost trust in love itself. Because when you give everything you have and still feel unseen, you begin to believe that maybe love doesn't exist. You look at couples who hold each other freely, and you think, that must be fake. You look at people who show up fully, and you think, that must fade. Your worldview changes, not because love is impossible, but because you spent too long in a version of love that required hiding. And the danger here is that when a real, available, healthy love comes, you won't recognize it. You'll confuse peace with boredom. You'll mistake consistency for indifference. You'll sabotage what you've always wanted. Because the rules you obeyed rewired your belief about love. The eighth cost is your voice. Because every time you silence yourself, when you swallow your question, when you soften your truth, when you shrink your need, you weaken the muscle of speaking up. And the less you speak, the more foreign your own voice becomes. Until one day, you can no longer remember what it feels like to be fully honest in love. This is not just silence. This is erasure. And the most devastating cost of all is love itself, because in obeying their rules, you never get to experience the love you were seeking. Real love, the kind that heals, the kind that expands, the kind that feels safe and electric at once, cannot grow inside the soil of silent rules. It requires openness. It requires truth. It requires both people showing up without masks. And when you obey their rules too long, you rob yourself of that chance. Here's the paradox. Avoidants build their rules to protect themselves from pain. But the longer you obey them, the more both of you lose. They lose the chance to be truly known. You lose the chance to be truly loved. And together, you build a connection that feels more like prison than partnership. So the question becomes, how many silent rules have you been obeying? How many times have you swallowed your truth, thinking it was the only way to keep them close? How many years have you traded for scraps of intimacy, when your soul was starving for the whole meal? The cost is not just emotional. It is spiritual. It is existential. Because when you obey their silent rules, you are not just losing them. You are losing yourself. And the truth is, no relationship is worth the price of erasing your own soul. That is the hidden cost. Not the fights you avoid. Not the peace you think you're protecting. But the slow death of your own truth. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because the question will rise inside you, louder and louder. If the price of keeping them is losing me, is it worth paying anymore? When you finally break the rules, at first, it feels terrifying. You've been trained to stay quiet, to keep your longings hidden, to shrink yourself small enough, to fit inside the cage they built. But then, something inside you breaks. Not in weakness, but in clarity. You realize you can't keep paying the price. You can't keep living a life where your heart whispers and no one hears it. So you speak. You tell the truth. You break the rule, and the air shifts. Because the moment you stop obeying their silent laws, you stop playing a game that was never meant to be won. The avoidant is confronted with something they've worked so hard to escape. Reality. Your needs, your boundaries, your voice, and they don't know what to do with it. Sometimes they panic, they retreat, they get defensive, they accuse you of being too much, too needy, too dramatic. But deep down, they feel something they haven't in years, the truth pressing against their walls. Other times, they fall silent, because silence is their oldest weapon. It's how they've always maintained control. But this time, the silence doesn't work, because you're not chasing it anymore. You're not rushing in to fill the gap, to soften the edges, to apologize for your own feelings. This time, you let the silence belong to them, and it scares them more than your words ever could. And then, there are the rare moments where something miraculous happens. When you break the rules, instead of running, they lean in. For the first time, they see the cost of their walls. For the first time, they hear what you've been holding back. For the first time, they realize that the intimacy they feared is the intimacy they've been craving all along. Because here's the paradox. Avoidants don't actually want obedience. They want freedom. They want space. But beneath that, they want someone strong enough to stand against their rules. They want someone who refuses to disappear, who refuses to live muted, who refuses to sacrifice their truth in order to be chosen. That is the one thing that pulls an avoidant closer than anything else. Authenticity. Because authenticity is not needy. It is powerful. It says, I am here. This is me. I will not vanish. To make you feel safe. And in that strength, The avoidant sees something rare, a love that cannot be controlled by distance. But here's the other truth. Sometimes, breaking the rules ends the relationship because the structure of the bond was built entirely on your compliance. And the moment you stop obeying, the scaffolding collapses. It hurts. It feels like loss. It feels like failure. But it is not failure. It is freedom. Because any love that requires you to erase yourself was never love. And by breaking the rules, you don't just lose them, you find yourself again. So what really happens when you stop obeying? Two things. Either they run, and you are released from the prison of silence, or they stay, and for the first time, a real relationship begins. Not one built on fear, not one built on control, but one built on truth. Because true intimacy is not built by following someone's unspoken rules. It is built when both people lay down their walls and show up real. And this is where transformation begins. Not when you beg them to change, not when you tiptoe around their triggers, not when you silence your heart to keep them comfortable, but when you decide that your truth matters as much as theirs, that your voice is as sacred as their fear, that your needs are not a burden. They are the blueprint of real love. Breaking the rules is not rebellion. It is restoration. It restores your wholeness. It restores your dignity. It restores the possibility of real connection, whether with them or with someone who can actually meet you there. So the question is not, what if I lose them by breaking the rules? The question is, what will I lose if I keep obeying them? Because the truth is, you've already been losing, piece by piece, moment by moment, need by silenced need, and breaking the rules, no matter how scary, is the only way to stop that quiet death. When you finally stop obeying, you reclaim the one thing you were never meant to surrender, yourself. And in that moment, you give the avoidant a chance, for the first time, to meet the real you. And if they can't, then you walk away whole, because you will never again pay the price of disappearing, just to be loved halfway. That's the hidden truth of avoidant love. The walls are high, the rules are silent, and the cost is heavy. But once you stop obeying, you stop living inside their prison. And whether they join you in freedom or not, you are free. And if this message has stirred something in you, if you felt yourself in these words, remember this: you are not too much. You are not unlovable. You are not wrong for wanting closeness. You are human, and your longing for connection is not your weakness. It is your greatest strength. So if you're ready to reclaim your truth, to stop obeying the rules that keep you small, and to finally invite love that feels real, start by giving this video a like, subscribing for more, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Because love should never feel like losing yourself. And the moment you choose truth, you'll see you were never the problem.